Mist clung to the weathered timbers of Caleb Walker's mountain cabin, matching the gray in his beard and the heaviness in his heart. 3 years a widower, he'd let everything crumble. The sagging porch, the leaking roof, his very will to continue. The morning's silence shattered as a small figure appeared at the edge of his property, clothes too thin for the mountain chill, face smudged with dirt but eyes burning with determination. "Please take me as your worker, sir. I'm strong," the boy pleaded, his thin arms trembling as he lifted a rusted toolbox nearly half his size. Something about those eyes, haunted yet hopeful, stirred memories Caleb had buried alongside his wife. Why had this child traveled alone to this remote cabin? What secret did the worn photograph in the boy's pocket hold? And could these two broken souls, one young and one old, rebuild more than just a crumbling mountain home? Dawn broke over the mountain ridge as Caleb Walker stepped onto his creaking porch, coffee mug in hand, eyes fixed on the small figure already at work sorting through rotted boards they'd pried loose yesterday. "Figured I'd get an early start," Eli said without looking up, hands steady despite their size as they separated salvageable wood from waste. Caleb grunted in acknowledgement, watching the boy work with a determination that belied his years, wondering again about the strange twist of fate that had delivered this child to his doorstep. "You promised to tell me where you're from," he finally said, setting down his mug on the porch railing, careful to avoid the spots where wood had begun to split and crumble. Eli's shoulders tensed, his movements becoming more deliberate as he replied, "Just over the ridge, sir." A vague answer that revealed nothing and everything at once. He was a mountain child. That much was clear from his calloused hands and the knowing way he tested wood for rot. Throughout the morning, Caleb observed the boy's methodical approach to the repairs, noting how he seemed to understand instinctively which boards needed replacing and which could be salvaged, skills that took most men years to develop. When noon sun beat down on them, Caleb brought out 2 plates of food, watching as Eli ate with the careful restraint of someone who had known hunger but was determined not to show it. "Your folks know where you are?" Caleb asked, the question hanging between them like the humidity that clung to the mountainside. Eli's eyes darkened, fingers tightening around his fork. "No, sir, they don't," he answered simply, offering nothing more despite Caleb's probing gaze. As the day progressed, they worked side by side rebuilding a section of porch that had nearly collapsed under years of neglect. And it was during this shared labor that Caleb noticed it again. The crescent-shaped birthmark on Eli's wrist revealed each time the boy reached for a nail or hammer, a distinctive mark so eerily familiar it made Caleb's breath catch. He'd seen that mark before, somewhere in the recesses of memory too painful to fully examine, like looking directly at a wound still fresh despite the passage of years. By late afternoon, the transformation of the porch corner was remarkable, and Caleb found himself grudgingly impressed by both the boy's skill and stamina. "You've earned your keep today," he admitted, watching Eli carefully gather his tools as shadows lengthened across the clearing. "One more day," the boy ventured, eyes fixed on the toolbox rather than meeting Caleb's gaze. "There's still that section by the steps that needs fixing." Against his better judgment, Caleb nodded, telling himself it was the work he needed, not the company. Certainly not the strange comfort that came from having another presence in this home that had known only silence since Margaret passed. After a simple supper, Caleb led Eli back to the barn, providing fresh water for washing and another blanket against the mountain night chill. "You'll need to tell me eventually," Caleb said from the doorway. "Can't keep a child who belongs elsewhere." The boy nodded solemnly, arranging his makeshift bed with care, that mysterious toolbox positioned within arm's reach like a talisman. Walking back to his empty house, Caleb found his thoughts circling around the birthmark, the familiar set of the boy's jaw when concentrating, and the inexplicable feeling that Eli wasn't a stranger at all, but a puzzle piece that somehow fit into the jagged edges of his past, a past he'd tried desperately to board up like the broken windows of his neglected home. The week's agreement came reluctantly from Caleb's lips on the 3rd morning, words offered grudgingly as he watched Eli skillfully replace a section of damaged siding with precision that men twice his age might envy. "1 week," he muttered, avoiding the flash of relief in the boy's eyes, telling himself it was purely practical. His home had fallen into such disrepair since Margaret's passing that he'd need a month of Sundays to make it right alone. 3 years he'd let the cabin deteriorate, much like he'd allowed himself to wither, speaking to no one, save Martha from the general store, when monthly supplies became necessary. His days measured in silence, broken only by the persistent mountain winds that found every crack he hadn't bothered to seal. The isolation had become both punishment and comfort, a fitting tomb for the man he'd been before grief hollowed him out, leaving only this shell that moved through days without purpose or pleasure. Watching Eli work brought unwelcome awareness of how far things had fallen. The boy replaced rotted window frames with careful measurements, mixed a batch of plaster with the confidence of a seasoned tradesman, all while Caleb pretended not to notice how the child's eyes constantly scanned the tree line at every distant sound, as though expecting unwelcome visitors at any moment. It happened on the 5th day, when Caleb returned from chopping wood to find Eli frozen in the main room, hands clutching a silver-framed photograph normally kept face down on the mantel. Margaret, on their wedding day, her smile bright enough to power the whole mountain, standing beside a younger Caleb whose face hadn't yet learned the geography of grief. "Put that down," Caleb said sharply, watching as the boy carefully returned the frame with a reverence that seemed beyond his years, mumbling apologies while keeping his eyes fixed on Margaret's face a moment longer than necessary. Later that evening, as they worked by lantern light to repair a section of kitchen flooring, Caleb observed the boy's hands moving with practiced ease, noting how he selected specific tools without hesitation, the way he gauged wood grain before cutting, all signs of knowledge impossible for a child his age unless he'd been apprenticed since he could walk. "Who taught you carpentry, boy? And don't tell me just your pa. This is craftsman work," Caleb pressed, watching Eli's shoulders tense beneath his too large shirt, those small hands stilling on the plank he'd been measuring. "My grandfather was a furniture maker," came the careful answer, delivered to the floorboards rather than to Caleb. "Pa said I got his hands," and though the words themselves might be true, Caleb recognized the careful construction around whatever truth the boy was hiding, having built similar walls around his own pain these past years. That night, checking on Eli in the barn that now held a proper cot instead of blankets on hay, Caleb found him sleeping with one hand curled protectively around something hidden beneath his pillow, the corner of what appeared to be a folded paper just visible. He didn't investigate further, respecting whatever small secret comforted the boy in sleep, but as he walked back to a house that felt less empty with each repair, Caleb wondered what circumstances would drive a child with such obvious talent away from home and family, what shadows chased him to this remote cabin, and why, despite his better judgment, Caleb felt increasingly certain that Eli belonged here, fitting into the broken places of this mountain home as naturally as the replaced beams now supporting its renewed structure. The porch repairs began in earnest on the 8th day, Eli suggesting they replace the entire front section rather than patch the worst areas, a proper solution that Caleb couldn't argue with despite the additional work. They settled into a rhythm, Caleb cutting the heavy boards while Eli measured and marked with precision, the boy's small frame belying his understanding of structure and support, occasionally offering suggestions that Caleb found himself accepting more often than not. By midday, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, bringing the scent of imminent rain that made Caleb's old injuries ache in warning. "Storm's coming," he observed, watching as Eli's hands faltered on the measuring tape, the boy's eyes darting nervously to the darkening sky as though it held more threat than just rain and wind. "We should secure these materials," Eli suggested, voice tight as he began gathering tools with unusual haste, movements growing increasingly jerky as the first distant rumble of thunder rolled across the mountains. Noticing the boy's distress, Caleb found himself filling the tense silence with stories as they worked, words coming easier than they had in years. "This cabin's stood through 100 years of mountain storms," he said, describing how his grandfather had built the original structure, how each generation had added their mark, the riverstone fireplace, the extended kitchen, the covered well, carefully avoiding any mention of the nursery he'd built with his own hands or the family he'd once envisioned filling these rooms. The first heavy raindrops began to fall as they secured the last of the lumber under tarps, and inside the cabin, with each thunderclap, Caleb noted how Eli flinched, despite obvious efforts to conceal his fear, the boy positioning himself away from windows while pretending to organize nails and screws with trembling fingers. The storm was reaching its peak when the unfamiliar sound of an engine disturbed the isolated property, a sleek black sedan moving slowly along the muddy access road, its city cleanliness starkly out of place against the wild mountain backdrop. At the first sight of the vehicle, Eli's face drained of color, his body instinctively dropping below window level as he scrambled toward the darkened hallway, pressing himself into the shadows with such practiced terror that Caleb felt a surge of protective anger toward whoever had taught a child such fear. "Stay inside," Caleb ordered, stepping onto the half-finished porch as the car slowed further, its tinted windows revealing nothing of its occupants as it lingered at the property edge before continuing down the mountain road, leaving only muddy tire tracks as evidence of its intrusion. When Caleb returned inside, he found Eli huddled in the corner of the pantry, knees drawn to his chest, breathing in the controlled manner of someone accustomed to hiding. "They're gone," Caleb assured him, watching as the boy uncurled slowly, embarrassment replacing fear as he realized his reaction had revealed more than all his careful silences. That night, after Eli had finally fallen asleep in the barn, Caleb sat on his partially rebuilt porch despite the lingering rain, pipe lit but forgotten in his hand, as he considered the black car's appearance in connection with the boy's terror, wondering what kind of people would chase a child up a mountain, what Eli might have witnessed or known to drive him from home to the doorstep of a stranger, and why, despite knowing better, Caleb felt increasingly determined that whoever had come looking would find nothing but an old man who remembered what it meant to protect what was his. The discovery happened on a Tuesday morning while Caleb was chopping wood behind the cabin, the rhythmic thunk of his axe providing cover for Eli's curious exploration of the house's east wing where warped floorboards needed attention. Testing the boards for weakness, the boy had leaned against a door he assumed was a closet. Surprised when the tarnished key left carelessly in its lock turned with his weight, granting access to a room that time had forgotten. Sunlight filtered through dusty curtains, illuminating a space preserved like a museum. A quilt still draped across a neatly made bed, perfume bottles arranged on a vanity, dresses hanging in an open wardrobe, and most striking of all, a collection of framed photographs chronicling a life suddenly cut short. Eli stood transfixed by an image of Caleb, decades younger, his arm around a laughing woman whose eyes held a familiar shape that made the boy's heart race with recognition. So absorbed was he that Caleb's thunderous voice from the doorway startled him physically. "Get out," the old man growled, face contorted with a pain so raw it seemed the loss had happened yesterday rather than years ago. "I never said you could come in here," Caleb continued, voice breaking as his eyes swept over the untouched shrine to his wife, while Eli backed away with whispered apologies, retreating to the safety of the barn where he remained until sunset, certain his transgression would mean banishment from the only safe place he'd found in months. The apology came as darkness settled over the mountain, Caleb appearing in the barn doorway with 2 steaming mugs and shoulders hunched with the effort of the words that followed. "That was Margaret's room," he explained, passing a mug of hot chocolate to the boy whose eyes remained fixed on the floor. "I sealed it after she died. Couldn't bear to change anything." They sat in silence, broken only by the occasional call of night birds, until Caleb continued, voice rough with disuse. "We had a son, James. Fever took him when he was just 4. Nearly destroyed Margaret, but she fought through it, always stronger than me." Another long pause followed as Caleb seemed to weigh his next words carefully. "After she passed, I couldn't stay in our bedroom, couldn't look at her things, so I locked it all away, been sleeping in the main room since." That night marked a shift between them. Caleb, allowing Eli to help with repairs to the east wing, including reinforcing joists beneath Margaret's preserved room, a trust that felt significant to them both. Working on the kitchen cabinets days later, Caleb discovered with quiet astonishment that Eli had instinctively used the same herringbone pattern for a drawer repair that Caleb himself had designed 20 years earlier, a technique documented only in journals kept in a desk drawer the boy had never accessed. Even more curious was Eli's suggestion to extend the south window for better light, an improvement Caleb had planned but never mentioned, detailed in those same journals alongside sketches remarkably similar to the boy's rough drawings. These coincidences lingered in Caleb's mind as he watched Eli work, the way the boy's hands seemed to anticipate the house's needs, how he sometimes paused before walls as though listening to secrets only the timber could tell, all reinforcing Caleb's growing suspicion that Eli's appearance was somehow connected to the past he'd tried so desperately to board up and forget, a past that seemed determined to find its way back into the light through the work of a child's hands. Martha Jenkins arrived unannounced on Thursday afternoon, her ancient pickup truck announcing itself with a sputtering engine long before it appeared on the narrow dirt road. Eli tensed at the unfamiliar sound until Caleb reassured him. "Just Martha, brings supplies up from town monthly." The elderly woman moved with surprising agility, gray hair in a practical bun, weathered hands carrying groceries which she surrendered to Caleb with familiar ease. Her sharp eyes immediately found Eli, who stood uncertainly by the newly repaired porch steps, and something in her expression shifted from curiosity to an unreadable intensity that made the boy shuffle nervously. "Finally got yourself some help," she observed, voice carefully neutral though her gaze remained fixed on Eli with peculiar interest. "Boy showed up looking for work," Caleb explained simply as Martha unpacked additional supplies, commenting on the visible improvements to the long-neglected cabin. Over coffee, with Eli sent to continue repairs on the back steps, Martha leaned toward Caleb, her typically straightforward manner replaced with unusual caution. "Strangers been asking questions down in Riverdale," she murmured, eyes tracking Eli at a distance. "Well-dressed city folks showing photographs, asking about a boy." Caleb stiffened. Memories of the black sedan suddenly shot as Martha continued. "They claim to be family, but something doesn't sit right, too polished in their concern." She paused before adding, "That boy of yours, something familiar about him, can't quite place it." Before Caleb could correct her assumption, Martha placed a weathered hand on his arm. "When you get a chance, check the county records office. Look up that old matter concerning Margaret's sister." At the truck out of earshot, she added, "Whatever you decide, Caleb Walker, remember some family is made rather than born. And some born family doesn't deserve the name." That evening, sharing a simple stew, Caleb watched Eli carefully arrange each item on his plate without mixing them, identical to Margaret's own mealtime ritual. "How long have you been on your own?" Caleb finally asked, gentler than his usual inquiries. Eli's spoon paused, eyes fixed on his plate as he seemed to calculate the risks of truth. "Since winter," he admitted. "After Grandma passed, there was nobody else." The words emerged with practiced neutrality, but Caleb caught the slight tremble in the boy's hand. "And before that?" Caleb pressed carefully, watching Eli's shoulders hunch protectively. "Just me and Grandma since I was little," came the guarded response, followed by a deliberate change of subject as Eli asked about plans for tomorrow's repair work. Later, washing dishes in companionable silence, Caleb found himself studying the boy's profile in the fading light, searching for the familiarity Martha had hinted at, wondering what secrets might be buried in county records, and feeling increasingly certain that the strangers asking questions and Eli's appearance were threads of the same mystery, one that somehow connected to Margaret and the past he'd tried so desperately to leave behind. The trip to Riverdale came reluctantly, postponed until necessity demanded it, with Caleb leaving Eli carefully instructed to remain inside and answer for no one. The small mountain town's single main street lined with weathered buildings looked unchanged since his last visit, the familiar scent of pine and wood smoke hanging in the crisp air. At Henderson's general store, Caleb gathered supplies methodically, placing each item in his basket with deliberate care, only half listening to the exchange of news until Harriet Miller's voice cut through. "Fancy city car been around again, that man in the expensive suit showing pictures of some runaway boy." Several heads nodded as Doris added, "Claims the boy is his grandson. But Richard, who pumped his gas, says there was another man in the car, watching everything like some bodyguard, never even rolled down his window." Caleb kept his expression neutral, selecting nails while his mind raced with implications, especially when Tom remarked, "Man said the boy might be hiding with relatives in the mountains, offered a reward for information, more money than most folks here see in a month." When Mabel directly asked if he had seen any strange children around his property, her eyes curious and slightly eager at the prospect of reward money, Caleb answered gruffly, "No reason a child would come that far up, nothing but hard work and solitude there," the lie uncomfortable though his weathered face betrayed nothing. With supplies loaded into his rusting truck, Caleb made the short walk to the county records office, a small room in the back of the town hall smelling of dust and old paper, floorboards creaking beneath his heavy boots. His request for records concerning Margaret's sister Elizabeth raised eyebrows but produced a slim folder after several minutes of searching through metal filing cabinets. Caleb had barely begun examining the faded marriage certificate linking Elizabeth Walker to Richard Blackwood, the elegant script confirming what he had begun to suspect, when the door opened with a soft chime, admitting a tall man in a tailored suit that cost more than most mountain folk earned in months. "Pardon my interruption," the stranger said smoothly, though his calculating eyes catalogued everything with precision. "Lawrence Blackwood. Hoping to look up some family property records in the area." The name sent a jolt through Caleb's spine, who carefully closed the folder before the man could glimpse its contents. nodding stiffly as the clerk turned her attention to the newcomer. The man's questioning gaze lingered on Caleb, taking in his rough clothes and calloused hands with barely concealed disdain, who muttered an excuse about checking supplies and departed with deliberate, unhurried pace that belied his urgency. At his truck, Caleb spotted the black sedan parked prominently before the town hall, its polished surface out of place among the dusty local vehicles. A broad-shouldered man watching from the driver's seat, confirming his suspicions about the stranger's identity. The drive back stretched interminably, the familiar winding road suddenly fraught with unease, each curve bringing fresh worries about what the documents had begun to reveal, about the connection between the boy and the wealthy men searching the county, about Martha's warning, and the familiar way Eli's eyes sometimes caught the light exactly as Margaret's had done. Parking at the cabin, relief flooded him at the sight of Eli emerging safely from the porch, hammer still in hand from continued repairs, tempered by the certainty that his peaceful isolation was ending, that the past he had tried to outrun had finally circled back, bringing complications he was not certain he had strength to face, yet knowing equally that he would not surrender this boy to whatever shadow had driven him to seek refuge on this remote mountain. While Caleb ventured to town, Eli had initially worked diligently on the porch railings, sanding each spindle with careful attention, but curiosity eventually drew him back to the house, to the questions that had haunted him since arrival. In the main bedroom, he discovered a loose floorboard beneath the rag rug, the kind of hiding place his own father had used for important papers and small valuables. The space beneath contained a metal box, its lid reluctantly yielding to reveal a collection of photographs Caleb had deemed too painful for display, yet too precious to destroy. Nestled among them was an image that made Eli's hands tremble, a young woman with familiar eyes that mirrored his own, her smile capturing a brightness he recognized from fleeting glimpses in mirrors. So absorbed in the discovery, he failed to hear Caleb's return until the floorboards creaked behind him, the old man's face draining of color at the sight of the exposed hiding place and the photograph in Eli's guilty hands. "Who is she?" Eli whispered, unable to mask his intensity as he held the photograph with reverent care. Caleb sank heavily onto the bed, silence stretching between them before he finally answered. "Elizabeth Walker, Margaret's younger sister, left these mountains near 40 years ago." His weathered fingers took the photograph gently, eyes clouding with memories as he continued. "Bright girl, full of dreams too big for this hollow. Married some businessman from the city against her father's wishes." Eli's reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a quickening of breath, pupils dilating slightly, fingers flexing as though reaching for something just beyond grasp. "You knew her," Caleb stated rather than asked, watching the boy struggle between honesty and self-protection. "My grandmother had a picture like this," Eli finally admitted, voice barely audible. "Said it was my mother when she was young, before she got sick." The revelation hung between them, neither ready to verbalize the connections forming like bridges across decades of separation. They retreated to safer territory that afternoon, Caleb suggesting they begin work on the cabin's northwest corner, where the roof had begun to sag dangerously. Working side by side on the ladder scaffolding they constructed, passing tools without need for words, a rhythm developed between them that transcended their brief acquaintance, each anticipating the other's movements with uncanny precision. When rain threatened late afternoon, they hurried to secure waterproof tarps over their work, laughing together when a sudden gust plastered the heavy plastic against Caleb, momentarily transforming him into a flailing ghost. That unexpected shared laughter marked something new between them, a crack in the careful walls each had constructed around their pain. Over dinner, their conversation flowed more easily, Caleb sharing stories of mountain seasons, teaching Eli how to read weather from cloud patterns and wildlife behavior. Knowledge passed through generations of Walker men. The boy listened with rapt attention, occasionally offering observations that revealed his own deep connection to mountain ways despite his mysterious origins. As darkness gathered outside, neither mentioned the photograph or its implications, yet both felt the shift in their relationship, no longer merely a temporary arrangement of convenience, but something with roots reaching deeper into soil they both sensed was shared. Helping clear dishes, Eli paused at the window, staring out at the darkened tree line with familiar wariness. "Do you think they will come here, the men in the black car?" he asked, the question revealing his continued fear despite growing comfort. Caleb placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder, surprised at how natural the gesture felt. "If they do, they will find more than they bargained for," he promised, the protective fierceness in his voice conveying more than mere hospitality, the words of a man who had found something worth defending after years of emptiness. The screams pierced the quiet mountain night like shattered glass, tearing Caleb from deep sleep to instant alertness, years of mountain living having taught him to distinguish between ordinary forest sounds and true distress. Fumbling for his boots and a lantern, he rushed toward the barn, where Eli thrashed against invisible enemies, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead despite the cool night air. Eyes open but seeing terrors from another time and place. "Boy, wake up. You are safe here," Caleb repeated, keeping his distance until recognition gradually dawned in Eli's wide eyes, the child's breathing ragged as he pulled himself back to reality. "They were chasing me again," Eli whispered, small body still trembling violently. "The men in suits who came after Grandma died. Saying they were family, but their eyes were cold like stones in winter." Caleb offered a tin cup of water, noting how the boy's hands shook as he drank, deciding in that moment that the barn was no longer suitable accommodation. "Gather your things," he instructed gruffly, helping collect the few possessions Eli had arrived with, including that mysterious toolbox he guarded so carefully. The spare bedroom had remained untouched since Margaret's passing, dust covers protecting the simple furnishings, but it took only minutes to make it habitable. Caleb working efficiently while Eli stood uncertainly in the doorway, clutching his toolbox like a shield. "No more sleeping in the barn," Caleb stated, tone allowing no argument as he showed the boy clean linens and a wash basin, the domestic task bringing unexpected memories of preparing this same room for hoped-for children who never arrived. Settled in the new space, Eli gradually shared fragments of the nightmare, describing men who spoke with practiced gentleness while their eyes calculated value, who had appeared within days of his grandmother's funeral, who had claimed rights to guardianship through paperwork Eli could not understand but instinctively mistrusted. "Grandma always said if anything happened to her I should find my people in the mountains," he confessed, the phrase striking Caleb with peculiar force given their discoveries of the previous day. Throughout the following morning, as they returned to roof repairs under clear autumn skies, Caleb found himself cataloging small gestures and habits that echoed Margaret so precisely they could not be coincidence. The way Eli tilted his head when considering a problem, how he unconsciously hummed 3 notes when concentrating, his preference for organizing tools by size rather than function. These observations crystallized into near certainty when Eli automatically reached for a specific box of roofing nails Caleb had not mentioned owning, navigating directly to their location in a storage shed, as though guided by inherited memory. By mid-afternoon, they had completed repairs on the northwestern section of the roof, the new shingles standing out against weathered ones like a healing wound. Eli demonstrating surprising skill in matching the original pattern despite never having done roofing work before. Pausing for water, Caleb studied the boy silhouetted against the mountain vista, a small figure somehow belonging perfectly in this landscape despite his mysterious origins, and felt something long dormant stirring within himself. The protective instinct of family, the recognition of shared blood that transcended formal acknowledgement. That night, checking on Eli before retiring, Caleb found the boy peacefully asleep for the first time since his arrival, one hand still curled around the corner of his pillow, in precisely the same manner Margaret had always slept, the resemblance so striking that Caleb stood watching longer than necessary, feeling the pieces of a puzzle he had not known he was solving finally beginning to form a recognizable picture, one that both comforted and complicated his solitary existence. Martha Jenkins returned 3 days later, her approach announced by the familiar rattle of her aging truck. But her typical greeting was replaced with unusual solemnity as she pressed a yellowed envelope into Caleb's calloused hands. "Found this while clearing out my attic storage," she explained quietly, ensuring Eli remained out of earshot where he worked on fitting a replacement window frame with remarkable precision. "Margaret gave it to me for safekeeping years ago, made me promise to hold it unless circumstances arose where it might be needed." The envelope bore Margaret's name in elegant script, the paper creased from repeated folding and unfolding before being sealed away. Alone in the workshop while Eli continued his tasks, Caleb carefully extracted the fragile pages, recognizing immediately the handwriting of Elizabeth Walker, Margaret's sister who had left the mountains for city life decades earlier. The letter, dated 15 years ago, spoke of regrets and missed opportunities, of a marriage grown cold and controlling, but most significantly, mentioned a grandson Elizabeth feared would be shaped by her husband's ambition rather than allowed to follow his own path. If anything happens to me, Elizabeth had written, Richard will never allow the boy connection to our mountain roots, to the Walker heritage that might teach him values beyond wealth and influence. The final paragraph contained a plea that hollowed Caleb's chest with its implications. Should my grandson ever find his way to you, sister, know that he carries our blood and deserves the protection of family, even from those who claim the legal right to determine his future. Folding the letter with trembling hands, Caleb watched through the window as Eli confidently installed the repaired frame, his small fingers working with an intuitive understanding of wood and structure that spoke of inherited talent rather than mere training. The boy measured each angle with his eye rather than tools, making adjustments with the instinctive feel of someone born to the craft, just as Caleb's father and grandfather had done before him. Martha departed with a knowing look but no further explanation, leaving Caleb to consider the growing evidence connecting Eli to his past, to the family he had thought lost forever with Margaret's passing. They worked through the afternoon, replacing rotted window casings, Caleb noting how Eli incorporated decorative touches matching the original designs without being shown, crafting corner details identical to those throughout the cabin as though following blueprints etched in his blood. The boy had just completed the south-facing kitchen window when the black sedan appeared on the access road, moving deliberately toward the cabin before stopping at the property line. Unlike previous occasions, the vehicle remained stationary for several minutes, its tinted windows concealing occupants who clearly observed the cabin and its inhabitants. Eli froze at the sight, hammer clutched white-knuckled in his small hand, but rather than hiding as before, he moved closer to Caleb, who instinctively placed himself between the boy and the unwelcome observers. After what seemed an eternity, but was merely moments, the sedan reversed smoothly and departed, leaving only dust and unspoken threats in its wake. That night, securing the newly repaired windows against the autumn chill, Caleb made a silent promise to both Margaret and the boy who slept under his roof, a promise to protect what family remained, regardless of what complications tomorrow might bring, regardless of what the Blackwoods might attempt in their pursuit of control over a child whose heritage clearly belonged to these mountains, to the Walker name, to the home being rebuilt by four hands connected by more than mere circumstance. The confrontation came without warning on a crisp morning as Caleb and Eli worked to replace damaged siding on the eastern wall of the cabin. The black sedan appeared silently on the access road, stopping directly before the house rather than maintaining its previous distance. Caleb motioned for Eli to go inside, the boy vanishing through the back door without argument, while Caleb continued working, feigning indifference as expensive shoes crunched across gravel and a tailored figure emerged into his peripheral vision. "Mr. Walker, I presume?" the visitor said, voice cultured and confident. "Lawrence Blackwood, attorney representing the Blackwood family interests." Caleb acknowledged him with a bare nod, deliberately setting down his hammer with unhurried movements, noting the man's assessment of the property with calculating eyes. "I understand you live quite isolated up here," Lawrence continued smoothly, "but I wonder if perhaps you might have encountered a young boy in the area, approximately 10 years old, who ran away from his legal guardians several weeks ago." He produced a photograph from an inner pocket, offering it with practiced concern that never reached his eyes. Caleb barely glanced at the image of Eli in formal clothing, looking uncomfortable and constrained, before shaking his head. "No children up this way," he responded flatly. "Nothing for them here but hard work and harsh weather." Lawrence smiled thinly, clearly unconvinced, withdrawing an envelope from his jacket. "The Blackwood family is extremely concerned for their grandson's welfare and is offering a substantial reward for information leading to his return to proper care." The envelope, casually displayed to reveal several $100 bills, was met with stony silence from Caleb, who maintained steady eye contact without reaching for the offered money. $5,000 for simply pointing us in the right direction, Mr. Walker, no questions asked," Lawrence pressed, adding with calculated precision. "The boy belongs with his family. Surely you understand the importance of proper upbringing and education that only wealth can provide." Caleb returned to his work, selecting a nail with deliberate care. "Like I said, no children up here, just an old man fixing his home before winter." The attorney lingered, making one final attempt. "Should you happen to encounter the boy, please consider that his grandfather is a powerful man accustomed to getting what he wants, one way or another," the threat barely veiled beneath professional courtesy. After the sedan disappeared down the mountain road, Eli emerged cautiously, shoulders rigid with tension as he watched until the last dust settled. That was him, the man who came after Grandma died. He confirmed quietly. My mother was Elizabeth Blackwood, daughter of Vernon Blackwood, who owns half the mining operations east of the Mississippi. His small hands twisted nervously as he continued. They never acknowledged me while Pa was alive, said he wasn't good enough for their daughter, but after he died last spring, suddenly they wanted me. Not as family, but as heir to continue the Blackwood name. The revelation hung between them like morning mist as they returned to work with renewed purpose, Caleb demonstrating proper technique for weather sealing the siding while Eli followed with quick, intelligent adaptations. They worked later than usual that evening, securing windows and reinforcing door frames, neither mentioning the unspoken understanding that their repairs now served dual purposes: restoration of a neglected home and creation of a fortress against those who would separate what fate had joined together, their shared labor transforming the cabin into both shelter and statement of defiance against wealth that believed it could purchase what rightfully belonged to the mountain. 2 days after Lawrence Blackwood's visit, Caleb made another trip to town, this time with clear purpose that led him directly to the county courthouse records room. Agnes, the elderly clerk who had known the Walker family for generations, helped him locate documents tracing Elizabeth Walker's path after leaving the mountains. The marriage certificate to Richard Blackwood confirmed what Caleb already suspected, but newspaper clippings from 15 years ago revealed darker truths. Elizabeth Blackwood, née Walker, had died suddenly at age 35, the official cause listed as accidental drowning at the family lake house, though several articles noted unusually brief investigation into a wealthy family tragedy. Returning home with photocopies and troubled thoughts, Caleb found Eli had completed the morning repairs they had planned together, the boy's inherent understanding of structure allowing him to work independently with increasing confidence. Over lunch, Caleb carefully broached the subject that had haunted him since Martha's letter arrived. "Your mother," he began gently, watching Eli's expression close like a startled flower. "Was she Elizabeth Blackwood?" The boy nodded slowly, eyes fixed on his plate as he pushed food in careful circles. "I don't remember her much," he admitted, voice barely audible, "just her singing sometimes, and how she smelled like lavender." He swallowed hard before continuing. "Pa said she got sad a lot, that her family made her choose between them and us, and it broke something inside her." The words emerged with practiced neutrality that spoke of rehearsed explanation, a child's attempt to understand adult complexities. "After she died, Pa moved us to the mountains on the other side of the county. Said it was where she would have wanted us to be." In careful fragments throughout the afternoon as they installed new support beams under the cabin's eastern section, Eli revealed how his father, Thomas Hayes, had raised him with carpentry skills and mountain values, living modestly despite occasional mysterious envelopes of money that arrived without sender information. How after his father's sudden heart attack last spring, his grandmother had taken him in briefly before her own passing. How the Blackwoods had appeared immediately after her funeral, with legal papers and promises that never quite reached their calculating eyes. The cabin was transforming under their shared labor, its structural integrity restored after years of neglect, new siding gleaming alongside weathered boards they had determined still had life in them, windows now closing properly against mountain drafts, the roof no longer threatening to surrender to winter snow. Neighbors had begun to notice. Martha mentioning that word had spread through the small community about Caleb's mysterious young helper and the remarkable improvements to property many had assumed would eventually collapse under the weight of its owner's grief. That evening, standing together on the porch surveying their work, Caleb finally asked the question that had lingered unspoken between them. "Your grandmother, before she died, did she tell you to find me specifically?" Eli hesitated, then reached into his treasured toolbox, withdrawing a worn envelope addressed simply, "To my brother, Caleb Walker, Piney Ridge." The boy handed it over carefully, whispering, "Grandma said if anything happened, I should find my mother's people. That there was an uncle on the mountain who would understand about family being more than just blood and names on paper." Taking the unopened letter with trembling fingers, Caleb recognized his sister's handwriting. Realizing with stunning clarity that the boy who had appeared on his doorstep was not merely his wife's nephew, but his own blood relation, the family connection closer and more binding than he had dared to hope. Lawrence Blackwood returned 1 week later, this time accompanied by the silent, broad-shouldered man who had previously remained in the car, their arrival marked by the slam of car doors that echoed across the clearing like warning shots. Eli was inside sorting nails while Caleb split firewood, activity he continued without acknowledgement as the unwelcome visitors approached. "Mr. Walker." Lawrence began without preamble. "Our patience has reached its limit regarding the boy." He extracted a leather portfolio, removing official-looking documents with county seals visible on their covers. "These papers grant temporary custody of Elijah Hayes to his grandfather, Vernon Blackwood, pending final arrangements. The court has recognized the Blackwood family claim as nearest living relatives with financial means to provide proper upbringing." Caleb set down his axe with deliberate care, wiping his hands before accepting the papers, studying them with outward calm that belied his internal anger. "Nearest living relatives," he repeated slowly, returning the documents without further comment, positioning himself between the men and his cabin door. "The boy stays here," he stated flatly, voice carrying the unyielding quality of mountain granite. Lawrence sighed with theatrical disappointment, nodding slightly to his companion who took a menacing step forward. "We can return with the sheriff if necessary, Mr. Walker, though that would create unfortunate complications for everyone involved." The implicit threat hung in the autumn air until Caleb responded. "You do that, bring the sheriff. Explain to him how a grieving boy chose to seek refuge with family rather than strangers with legal papers but no blood ties that matter." The standoff ended without resolution, Lawrence leaving copies of the documents despite Caleb's refusal, promising to return within 48 hours, expecting compliance with the court order. Once the black sedan disappeared down the mountain road, Caleb made a rare phone call from the ancient rotary mounted on his kitchen wall, contacting James Mitchell, a former classmate who had become the only attorney in 3 counties who regularly challenged corporate interests. That evening, James arrived with his own stack of documents and reassurances that bought them precious time. "I filed an emergency stay citing new evidence regarding the boy's guardianship," he explained as they sat at the kitchen table, Eli listening silently from the corner where he pretended to sand cabinet doors. "The interesting part," James continued, spreading papers across the worn surface, "is that Thomas Hayes filed a will after his wife's sister died, specifically naming his brother-in-law, Caleb Walker of Piney Ridge, as Elijah's guardian should anything happen to him, and the maternal grandmother." The document in question clearly stated this intention, though Caleb had never been notified after Thomas Hayes' death, a fact James found suspicious given the Blackwoods' immediate appearance and claims. When directly asked why he hadn't mentioned this connection upon arrival, Eli admitted with downcast eyes, "Grandma just gave me the address and said to find my uncle on the mountain. She never explained exactly how we were related, just said he was family who would understand about the Blackwoods." The boy pulled a worn envelope from his pocket, offering it to Caleb. "This is the one I was supposed to give you right away, but I was scared you might send me back if you knew who was looking for me." Inside was a brief note from Thomas Hayes, written months before his death, expressing hope that should circumstances require it, Caleb would offer his nephew protection from those who valued bloodlines only for what could be gained from them. Working late into the night after Eli went to bed, Caleb and James developed a strategy to counter the Blackwoods' legal maneuvers, focusing on the clear intent in Thomas Hayes' will and the concerning pattern of information withheld from the court in their custody petition. The discovery happened by pure chance while Eli was helping clean decades of dust from the top shelves of the living room bookcase, a leather-bound volume tumbling into his hands as he carefully removed old encyclopedias for dusting. "What's this?" he asked, turning over the book with its faded ribbon marker, recognizing a journal rather than printed text. Caleb crossed the room quickly, surprise evident in his expression as he gently took the book. Margaret's journal, thought it was lost years ago. That evening after dinner, he placed it on the kitchen table between them, an offering of trust as much as information, watching as Eli carefully turned pages filled with his late wife's elegant handwriting, entries spanning nearly 15 years until abruptly ending 3 months before her death. The sections about Elizabeth proved most revealing, detailing the sisters' estrangement following her marriage to Richard Blackwood, how the once close siblings grew distant as Elizabeth became increasingly controlled by her husband and his family interests. "She came to visit one last time," Caleb read aloud, finding an entry dated 20 years earlier. "But something has changed in her. She spoke in whispers, even when Richard wasn't in the room. And when I asked why she never brings her son to meet his mountain family, she cried without answering, Most disturbing were Margaret's suspicions about the real reason behind the Blackwood family's periodic attempts to purchase mountain properties, including repeated generous offers for the Walker land despite its seemingly minimal value. Richard mentioned geological surveys during dinner, one entry noted, then quickly changed the subject when he realized I was listening. Elizabeth later warned me never to sell our land, no matter what they offer. Said there are things beneath these mountains the Blackwoods have coveted for generations. Further entries documented Margaret's independent research into the Blackwood Mining Consortium, discovering their specialized interest in rare earth minerals used in electronics manufacturing, with geological reports suggesting significant deposits beneath the very ridge where the Walker cabin stood. Caleb sat back heavily in his chair as understanding dawned. They don't just want custody of Eli, they want this land, have wanted it for decades. The realization explained the timing of their sudden interest in a grandson they had previously ignored. Their pursuit thinly disguised as family concern, while court custody would potentially give them control of any inheritance, including Thomas Hayes' portion of the Walker family property rights. Pa always said never to trust a Blackwood about anything. Eli whispered, carefully closing the journal with reverent fingers, said they see people as things to use, not care about. The next morning they returned to repairs with renewed purpose. Caleb teaching Eli traditional methods for mixing natural plaster as they refinished interior walls, the physical labor somehow lighter despite the shadow of legal threats hanging over them. Working side by side plastering the living room walls, they developed an efficient rhythm, Caleb applying the base coat while Eli followed with careful finishing strokes, the boy's inherited talent evident in the smooth surfaces he created. Between work sessions, Caleb shared stories about Margaret and their life together, filling gaps in Ellis' understanding of his family history, each revelation strengthening the bond between them. By evening, the living room had been transformed, its walls no longer cracked and peeling but smooth and ready for fresh paint. The physical renewal of the house paralleling their growing determination to protect both the boy and the land from those who would exploit both for profit, rather than preserve them for future generations. Martha Jenkins arrived with baskets of late autumn harvest, preserves sealed in glass jars passed from neighbor to neighbor according to mountain tradition. But her true offering came in the form of stories shared as she helped Caleb and Eli prepare wood for interior trim work. Blackwood's been trying to get their hands on mountain land since before I was born, she explained, sorting kindling with practiced efficiency. Started with fair offers that turned to pressure when folks refused to sell. Sometimes mysterious fires or livestock deaths forcing desperate families to give up properties that had been theirs for generations. She recounted how her own father had rejected Vernon Blackwood's grandfather despite crippling medical debts following a mining accident, choosing poverty over betrayal of land meant to sustain future generations. Those who held out formed an agreement, Martha continued. Never to sell to Blackwood interests regardless of circumstances, to keep these mountains in the hands of those who saw them as home, rather than resources to be extracted and abandoned. Eli listened intently, occasionally sharing his own fragments of knowledge gleaned from overheard adult conversations throughout his childhood. Pa never explained exactly why, but the night before he died, he made me memorize this address, the boy admitted quietly, sandpaper momentarily stilled in his small hands. Said, if anything happened, I should find my way to the mountain. That blood would recognize blood, and that walkers always protected their own. These words hung in the workshop like sawdust motes caught in sunlight, Caleb absorbing their significance while outwardly focusing on showing Eli how to properly match wood grain for the cabinet doors they were crafting. As days shortened toward winter, Caleb expanded their work beyond mere repairs, intentionally teaching Eli mountain skills passed through generations. How to identify medicinal plants still visible in the forest undergrowth, the proper way to preserve meat without refrigeration, methods for finding true north using natural indicators rather than compass, techniques for predicting weather by studying cloud formations and animal behavior. Between these lessons, they continued transforming the cabin's interior, replacing damaged floorboards with seasoned oak Caleb had stored in the barn rafters, refinishing kitchen cabinets with hand-mixed stains made from walnut hulls following recipes Caleb's grandfather had taught him. Each shared task seemed to strengthen invisible threads connecting them, the boy's natural aptitude for mountain ways suggesting heritage that transcended his years in the lowlands, his hands learning to move with the same rhythms as Caleb's, without conscious instruction. Their evenings developed comfortable routines, Meals shared at the kitchen table, followed by Caleb reading aloud from books that had educated Walker children for generations. Practical guides to self-sufficiency, histories of the region, folk tales that contained deeper wisdom beneath simple narratives. Often, Caleb would catch Eli watching him with an expression of quiet wonder, as though the boy had found something precious he had feared lost forever. The same feeling that occasionally overwhelmed Caleb himself when he observed how perfectly Eli fit into spaces that had remained empty since Margaret's passing. One evening, standing together on the porch surveying the forest's transition toward winter dormancy, Eli broke their comfortable silence with unexpected directness. "Pa said walkers have protected this mountain since before there were deeds and property lines, that it's part of who we are rather than something we own." Caleb nodded slowly, placing a weathered hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the slight frame that contained such remarkable resilience and determination. "Your father understood what matters. That some things pass through blood that no court document or company checkbook can measure or claim." His words both acknowledgement of their deepening bond and quiet promise that whatever challenges approached with the changing season, they would face them together as family always had on this mountain. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning, announced by the rumble of multiple vehicles ascending the mountain road. Lawrence Blackwood's sleek sedan, followed by the county sheriff's patrol car, dust billowing behind them like storm clouds. Caleb had been expecting this moment. The legal papers James Mitchell had prepared waiting on the kitchen table alongside Thomas Hayes' will and supporting documents. "Stay inside," he instructed Eli calmly, the boy nodding with solemn understanding, retreating to the window where he could observe without being immediately visible. Sheriff Davis stepped from his vehicle first, discomfort evident in his posture as Lawrence emerged with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authorities following his direction rather than questioning it. "Mr. Walker," the sheriff began awkwardly, "Mr. Blackwood here has court documents regarding custody of the minor child reportedly staying with you." Caleb nodded once, gesturing toward the cabin whose transformation was striking. Fresh paint and new siding, repaired windows, and a solid roof replacing the dilapidated structure that had stood just weeks earlier. "Got the paperwork inside, Sheriff," he responded evenly, leading them to the porch but not inviting them further, disappearing briefly to retrieve the documents James had prepared. Lawrence barely glanced at the counterfiling, dismissing it with a practiced wave. "Our petition takes precedence given the Blackwood family resources and blood relation to the boy." Sheriff Davis, however, studied the will with greater care, particularly the notarized statement from Agnes Fisher confirming she had witnessed Thomas Hayes sign the document naming Caleb Walker as guardian should anything happen to him and Ellis' maternal grandmother. "This appears properly executed," the sheriff noted reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable contradicting the wealthiest family in 3 counties, "and predates your client's petition." Lawrence stepped closer, voice dropping to ensure only Caleb could hear his next words. "Vernon Blackwood doesn't lose, Mr. Walker, not when he wants something. There are other ways to separate a man from both land and family if legal channels prove temporarily inconvenient. The threat might have carried more weight had Martha Jenkins' truck not chosen that moment to rattle into the pavement. Clearing, followed by Tom Henderson's delivery van and 3 more vehicles containing neighbors Caleb hadn't spoken with in years. "Brought those supplies you ordered, Caleb?" Martha called cheerfully, though her sharp eyes assessed the situation with perfect clarity. "Figured since everyone was heading this way to help with the roof insulation before winter sets in, might as well caravan up together." The impromptu gathering of mountain residents created an unexpected barrier between Lawrence and his objective, their silent solidarity communicating clear message that outsiders attempting to remove one of their own would face unified resistance rather than isolated opposition. Sheriff Davis, reading the shifting dynamics, returned the papers to Caleb with obvious relief. "Seems there's conflicting legal claims here that need proper court review. Until Judge Williams makes a final determination, the boy stays where he is." Lawrence retreated to his vehicle with barely contained fury, promising repercussions that would affect more than just custody arrangements. After the unwelcome visitors departed, neighbors who had arrived as strategic support stayed to genuinely assist, helping Caleb and Eli complete insulation work that would have taken days to accomplish alone, many commenting with approval on the remarkable transformation of both house and owner over recent weeks. Standing on the newly rebuilt porch as afternoon shadows lengthened across the clearing, Martha voiced what others had clearly been thinking. "Been too long since this place felt like a home, Caleb Walker. Good to see lights in the windows again and smoke from the chimney." Tom Henderson added with quiet conviction shared by the gathered neighbors. What mountains protect, we protect. Always been that way. The simple statement carrying centuries of collective understanding that some connections ran deeper than legal documents or blood tests could measure. That the boy who had appeared on Caleb's doorstep had somehow awakened not just one man from grief, but an entire community from complacency about what truly mattered in their shared heritage. The discovery occurred during a crisp afternoon exploration of the northern property line. Eli having asked permission to check rabbit snares Caleb had taught him to set the previous week. He returned breathless, clutching a metal stake with faded orange flagging tape and numbers stamped into its surface, excitement overriding his usual caution. Found these all along the ridge, he explained, producing a small notebook where Head sketched locations of similar markers, some ancient and rust-covered, others gleaming with recent placement, forming a grid pattern across the highest elevation of Walker property. Caleb examined the stake with growing unease, recognizing it as the type used in geological surveys rather than simple property boundaries. Suspicions deepening when Eli described finding a plastic case containing soil sample vials labeled with coordinates and dates from just 3 months earlier, well after Lawrence Blackwood had begun pursuing custody claims. That evening, they spread Margaret's journal across the kitchen table alongside county land records James Mitchell had provided, patterns emerging that connected the Blackwood Mining Consortium acquisitions over decades to specific geological formations running through these mountains. They started buying properties along this ridge 40 years ago, Caleb observed, tracing weathered fingers across the map, working their way toward our land from both directions. A separate geological survey report James had obtained through professional contacts confirmed what Margaret had suspected. The Walker property contained significant deposits of rare earth elements, essential for manufacturing advanced electronics, minerals becoming increasingly valuable as technology evolved and traditional sources grew depleted. It's never been about Eli, Caleb realized, the pieces finally assembling into coherent picture. Custody was just their approach to gaining control of the land rights attached to his inheritance. The boy nodded solemnly. Pa always said Blackwoods wanted something under the ground more than they ever wanted me above it. This knowledge added urgency to their preparations. Caleb contacting James to share their findings while Eli helped complete the external repairs that had transformed the once dilapidated cabin into a sturdy structure ready to face approaching winter. The contrast was remarkable, new siding gleaming alongside carefully preserved original logs, windows sealed against mountain winds, roof and chimney repaired to withstand heavy snow. The physical renovation paralleling the renewal that had occurred within its walls as two wounded souls found healing through shared purpose. Working together to apply final weatherproofing to the north-facing exterior wall, Caleb shared mountain wisdom passed through generations. Land isn't just property, it's legacy and responsibility, something borrowed from those coming after us, rather than inherited from those before. Eli absorbed these lessons with natural understanding that suggested inherited memory rather than mere instruction, his hands moving with increasingly confident skill across tasks that would have challenged men 3 times his age. The physical transformation of the cabin had become impossible to ignore, neighbors stopping occasionally to admire progress and offer assistance with specialized tasks. The isolation Caleb had cultivated since Margaret's death, gradually yielding to renewed community connections. Standing together on the ridge where Eli had discovered the survey markers, they surveyed the valley below, autumn colors fading toward winter browns and grays, the cabin visible as a sturdy haven against approaching storms. Its restored appearance a declaration of resilience and permanence against forces that would claim it for temporary gain rather than preserve it for generations yet unborn. Their shared determination hardening like mountain granite against whatever legal or corporate machinery the Blackwoods might deploy in their pursuit of resources that had waited millions of years beneath soil watered by Walker family. Sweat and tears. Word travels uniquely in mountain communities, not through gossip chains or social media, but through subtle networks of shared understanding. So when 3 trucks arrived unannounced on Saturday morning, men and women emerging with tools and supplies, Caleb understood the message their presence conveyed. Tom Henderson unloaded lumber of quality Caleb could have afforded, while Martha Jenkins directed placement of food baskets on the porch, with the authority of a general positioning troops. Roof insulation needs another set of hands. Frank Miller stated simply, already heading for the ladder, while his wife Sarah unpacked window treatments sewn from fabrics that somehow perfectly matched the cabin's restored character. Eli watched this influx with wide-eyed wonder, initially retreating to the workshop until Matthew Davis, the sheriff's teenage son, sought him out specifically, asking for help with assembling new porch furniture being constructed as a community gift. The gathering expanded throughout the day as families arrived with covered dishes and specific skills. Rebecca Williams, reinforcing interior insulation while her husband replaced worn door hinges. The Prescott brothers installing a more efficient wood stove. Elderly Jacob Turner carefully crafting decorative trim pieces alongside Eli, teaching mountain carving techniques passed through generations. No direct mentions of the Blackwood situation emerged in conversation, yet the purpose behind this unprecedented support remained clearly understood by all present, their actions speaking more eloquently than words about mountain people's commitment to protecting their own against outside threats. Martha, moving efficiently between groups coordinating efforts, explained quietly to Caleb, "Next week, we're having a proper gathering here, calling it a house blessing, though everyone understands its real meaning." The community event she described represented something not seen in these mountains for decades. A public declaration of collective protection dating back to times when survival depended on mutual support against forces threatening mountain ways. The day's work transformed the cabin's exterior completely, fresh paint and new fixtures, repaired steps and reinforced foundations, but more significantly altered something within Eli himself, his cautious reserve gradually yielding to tentative engagement as neighbors included him naturally in conversations and tasks, treating him as unquestionably belonging among them rather than temporary visitor. Late afternoon brought unexpected tension as Lawrence's black sedan appeared briefly at the property edge, observing the gathered community before departing without approach. The implied surveillance noted by all, yet acknowledged by none, mountain people simply working with increased determination after his unwelcome appearance. That evening, neighbors departed with promises to return the following weekend, leaving behind a cabin fundamentally transformed and a sense of protective circle drawn around Caleb and Eli that transcended mere physical improvements. Sitting before the new wood stove that night, warmth radiating through rooms now properly insulated against approaching winter, Eli broke their comfortable silence with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "Never seen anything like today, people helping just because they wanted to," Caleb nodded, understanding the deeper question beneath the boy's observation. "Mountain folk keep to themselves until one of their own needs standing with, then they come together without being asked, been that way longer than anyone remembers." Eli considered this, fingers tracing wood grain patterns on the chair. Jacob Turner had insisted he keep as a apprentice gift. "Do you think they see me as belonging here?" he finally whispered, the question revealing months of uncertainty despite growing attachment to this place and its people. Caleb studied the boy thoughtfully, noting how firelight illuminated features increasingly familiar in their resemblance to Walker family characteristics. "They recognized you before I did. Saw Walker blood in you from the first day Martha met you on that porch. Mountain people remember what matters even when courts and documents try to say different." James Mitchell arrived with a heavy folder and grim expression, spreading legal documents across the kitchen table while snow fell softly outside, the first serious accumulation of approaching winter. "Blackwoods filed these yesterday," he explained, pointing to formal custody petitions filled with legal terminology designed to intimidate, claiming unsuitable living conditions and inadequate guardianship. Standard tactics when pursuing children from families with fewer resources. More concerning were the secondary filings James had discovered through courthouse connections. Mineral rights claims based on obscure property laws and geological surveys conducted without landowner permission. A coordinated legal strategy designed to gain control of both Eli and the land beneath Caleb's cabin. Vernon Blackwood has 3 state judges in his pocket and a former governor on his company board, James warned, accepting coffee with grateful hands. "They fight with money and influence where we fight with truth and community, an uneven battlefield at best." Caleb listened silently, weathered face revealing nothing while Eli worked nearby. Sanding cabinet doors with increasing skill, his presence a reminder of exactly what stood at risk. After James departed with promises of counter-filings and strategic delays, Caleb retrieved a locked metal box from beneath kitchen floorboards, something undisturbed since Margaret's passing, containing documents she had assembled over years of quiet research. Among land deeds and family records lay a sealed envelope addressed in her careful handwriting. "Open if the Blackwoods come for our mountain." Inside, Caleb found detailed records of mineral deposits beneath Walker property, geological assessments Margaret had commissioned privately, along with evidence of environmental damage caused by Blackwood mining operations in 3 states. Cases settled quietly, with affected families silenced through non-disclosure agreements. An attached note explained her decision to keep this information secret. Our mountain guards more than minerals. It protects heritage and future generations who will need unspoiled land more than temporary wealth. Throughout following days, as legal threats loomed like gathering storm clouds, Caleb and Eli continued interior improvements with quiet determination, refinishing original hardwood floors hidden beneath worn carpeting, restoring built-in cabinets to their original craftsmanship, the physical work providing counterbalance to uncertainties surrounding their future together. Eli demonstrated remarkable transformation during these tasks, his initial hesitance replaced with confident suggestions and independent problem-solving, taking initiative on projects that would have intimidated him weeks earlier. Working together on crown molding for the living room, Caleb observed how naturally the boy had absorbed traditional techniques, hands moving with inherited precision that required minimal instruction. An unspoken connection to generations of Walker craftsmanship, evident in each careful measurement and cut. They won't stop, will they? Eli asked quietly one evening, as they applied finish coat to newly installed kitchen shelving, the question containing understanding beyond his years about powers aligned against them. Caleb considered his response carefully, respecting the boy's right to unvarnished truth despite instincts to protect him from harsh realities. Blackwoods have wanted this mountain since before you were born. And they believe anything can be bought for the right price, but they don't understand what can't be measured in dollars or claimed in courtrooms. He gestured toward the cabin's transformed interior, evidence of their shared labor and growing bond. Some connections run deeper than paper can record. Built through work and trust rather than money and power, the kind that last when everything else falls away. Eli nodded solemnly, returning to his task with renewed purpose. Shoulders straighter than when head first appeared on Caleb's porch, evidence of roots taking hold in soil where he truly belonged, despite forces gathering to uproot what had begun to flourish on this contested mountain. The DNA results arrived in a plain envelope, clinical language confirming what Hartz had already recognized. Eli Hayes and Margaret Walker shared genetic markers indicating direct family relationship, the science validating bonds that had formed naturally since the boy appeared on Caleb's doorstep. James Mitchell filed immediate guardianship petitions based on this evidence. Caleb's status as blood relative through marriage to Margaret now legally established alongside Thomas Hayes' explicit wishes in his will, creating foundation for permanent family recognition that even Blackwood money would struggle to overcome. The revelation prompted Caleb to unlock the cedar chest Margaret had kept beneath their bed, untouched since her passing, containing family treasures preserved through generations of Walker women. Inside, nestled among handmade quilts and yellowed letters, lay a photo album Caleb had forgotten existed, its pages documenting sisterly bonds between Margaret and Elizabeth from childhood through early adulthood before their paths diverged. Most striking was a photograph taken at Elizabeth's college graduation, Margaret standing proudly beside her sister. Their identical smiles echoed perfectly in Ella's face. The genetic connection undeniable when viewed across 3 generations. She looks happy here, Eli whispered, fingers tracing his mother's image with reverent care, before she married into the Blackwood family. Page after page revealed connections previously hidden, holidays shared and mountain traditions celebrated. Elizabeth clearly beloved by the Walker family despite her eventual estrangement after marriage. These discoveries coincided with completion of interior renovations that had transformed the cabin completely. Fresh paint brightening walls once darkened by neglect, refinished hardwood floors gleaming beneath new area rugs gifted by neighbors, windows allowing natural light to illuminate spaces where grief had previously gathered like dust. The physical restoration reflected emotional renewal occurring within its walls, Caleb's isolated existence giving way to engaged mentorship and protective care, Ellis guarded wariness, yielding to growing confidence in his place within both house and family. Martha brought curtains sewn specifically for each room, their colors complementing the natural wood tones Caleb and Eli had painstakingly restored, while Tom Henderson installed improved lighting fixtures that transformed evening atmosphere from gloomy to welcoming. Most significant was the bedroom that had evolved from temporary accommodation to permanent space, Eli gradually adding personal touches that spoke of settlement rather than transition. A bookshelf Caleb helped him build displayed treasured volumes and small carvings Jacob Turner was teaching him to create, walls adorned with framed photographs connecting him to Walker family history. His precious toolbox now proudly displayed on a custom stand rather than hidden beneath his bed. The transformation became complete the evening Eli spontaneously invited neighboring children to visit after school, their voices filling previously silent rooms with energy that belonged in a home rather than a shrine to grief. Caleb watching with quiet wonder as the boy confidently showed friends his woodworking projects and explained repair techniques with proper terminology and evident pride. Later, as winter darkness settled across the mountain, they sat before the fireplace Caleb had rebuilt with Eli's assistance. The boy relaxed in ways impossible to imagine when Head first arrived. Hypervigilance gradually replaced by security that allowed genuine childhood to emerge from beneath protective layers necessity had forced him to develop. "Do you think we'll win against them?" he asked without the fear that would have accompanied such questions weeks earlier. Trust evident in his willingness to discuss uncertainties directly rather than guard against potential disappointment. Caleb considered this thoughtfully, watching firelight illuminate features increasingly familiar in their Walker family resemblance. Some battles are won before they begin, when what matters most is already secured regardless of paperwork or court decisions. His hand resting briefly on the boy's shoulder in gesture that had become natural between them. Connection neither courts nor Blackwoods could sever regardless of legal outcomes still pending in county offices far removed from this mountain home they had reclaimed together. 2 black sedans arrived unannounced on a clear winter morning, their polished surfaces incongruous against the rugged mountain landscape, Eli spotting them first from the window where he sat reading, his body tensing with instinctive wariness as Lawrence Blackwood emerged from one vehicle while an elderly man exited the second, his expensive overcoat and commanding posture immediately identifying him as Vernon Blackwood, even before Lawrence performed formal introductions on the freshly rebuilt front porch. "My client wishes to resolve this unfortunate situation personally," Lawrence explained as Caleb reluctantly invited them inside, positioning himself protectively near Eli, who stood with remarkable composure beside the fireplace they had restored together. Vernon Blackwood surveyed the transformed interior with calculated assessment, his cold eyes noting improvements with the precision of someone automatically assigning monetary values rather than appreciating craftsmanship. "Impressive renovations," he acknowledged before removing an envelope from his coat, placing it deliberately on the kitchen table. "Inside, you'll find an offer reflecting both fair market value for this property and additional compensation for releasing any custody claims regarding my grandson." The amount visible on the document within would have seemed unimaginable months earlier, enough to purchase a larger home closer to town and provide security for years to come. The subtle implication clear that refusing such generosity would be foolish for a man of Caleb's modest means. "Not interested," Caleb responded without examining the figures, his voice carrying the unyielding quality of mountain stone, causing Vernon to narrow his eyes with evident displeasure at encountering resistance his wealth typically overcame. "Perhaps you're unaware of certain facts regarding Thomas Hayes," Vernon continued, removing a second folder containing police reports and newspaper clippings, including a drunk driving incident 15 years ago and questionable business practices that could significantly impact custody deliberations when presented to a judge. The threat hung in the room like wood smoke, Vernon watching for signs of weakening while Lawrence maintained professional distance near the door, neither man prepared for Ellis' quiet intervention. "My father made mistakes," the boy acknowledged with surprising steadiness. "But he taught me that owning them honestly matters more than hiding behind money or power." The simple statement momentarily unbalanced Vernon, clearly unaccustomed to direct challenge, especially from a child he considered merely property to be acquired. "This discussion isn't productive," Lawrence interjected smoothly, but Vernon silenced him with a sharp gesture, focus returning to Caleb with calculated intensity. "Everyone has a price, Mr. Walker. It simply requires finding the correct figure," he stated with absolute conviction born from decades of purchasing whatever he desired, including people and their principles. Caleb moved toward the door, effectively ending the conversation. "Some things aren't for sale at any price," his weathered hand resting protectively on Eli's shoulder, the gesture communicating more than words could express about bonds formed during months of shared labor and growing trust. Standing together on the porch after their unwelcome visitors departed, Caleb and Eli surveyed their completely restored home, its exterior transformation now fully realized with new siding gleaming in winter sunlight, sturdy roof topped with proper chimney cap, windows and doors securely fitted against mountain weather. The physical structure standing as testament to mutual commitment, stronger than legal threats or financial temptation. Two souls, having rebuilt not just a house but family connections that transcended bloodlines and court documents, creating something Vernon Blackwood with all his wealth could neither purchase nor truly comprehend. The county courthouse had never witnessed such attendance for a family court proceeding, every bench filled with mountain residents who had closed businesses and rearranged work schedules to demonstrate silent support, their presence communicating clear message about community values that transcended legal arguments. Judge Williams, known for impartiality despite pressure from wealthy interests, studied documents from both sides with methodical care, her questions revealing skepticism about the Blackwoods' sudden interest in a grandchild previously unacknowledged. The court notes that Thomas Hayes explicitly named Caleb Walker as guardian in a properly executed will, she observed, and DNA evidence confirms the family relationship through Margaret Walker, making this more than a case of convenient friendship. James Mitchell presented photographs of the transformed cabin alongside community affidavits, attesting to the positive changes in both property and Ellis' well-being since arriving on Caleb's doorstep, evidence of stable home environment established through mutual commitment rather than merely financial resources. Vernon Blackwood testified with practiced authority about providing superior educational and social opportunities, his tailored appearance and articulate delivery contrasting deliberately with Caleb's simple mountain attire, while Lawrence introduced carefully selected records highlighting Thomas Hayes' past difficulties. A man who chose alcohol over responsibility on multiple occasions, Vernon characterized with calculated disapproval, making impulsive decisions including an unauthorized will without consulting proper legal channels regarding family rights. The calculated assassination of a deceased man's character caused visible tension among mountain residents until Sheriff Davis unexpectedly requested permission to address the court, describing how Thomas Hayes had completed county-supervised rehabilitation programs and maintained perfect record for 12 years thereafter, his testimony countering the selective narrative presented by Blackwood attorneys. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted dramatically when Eli requested permission to speak, standing with surprising steadiness before Judge Williams despite Vernon Blackwood's obvious disapproval. "I never knew what home meant until I found my Uncle Caleb," the boy stated with simple dignity that silenced the room. "Not just the house we fixed together, but learning about my family, where I come from, who I am because of the Walkers as much as the Hayes side." His description of transformation from fearful runaway to community member learning traditional skills and responsibilities carried authenticity that expensive legal arguments couldn't counter, especially when he concluded, "For the first time since Pa died, I sleep without being afraid of tomorrow, knowing where I belong." Judge Williams deliberated visibly, weighing complex considerations beyond mere legal technicalities, ultimately announcing temporary continuation of current arrangements, pending final determination. The court recognizes significant questions regarding competing claims, but sees no evidence of immediate necessity to disrupt the child's current stable placement while these matters are properly investigated. The decision prompted barely concealed fury from Vernon Blackwood despite Lawrence's professional facade, while Caleb accepted the temporary victory with characteristic restraint, understanding that powerful opponents rarely conceded without exhausting every resource at their disposal. Departing the courthouse surrounded by neighbors who had stood witness to mountain values transcending wealth and influence, Caleb and Eli returned to their restored home with cautious optimism. The legal battle not yet won, but significant ground gained through community solidarity and the undeniable evidence of belonging that had developed between man and boy, who had rebuilt more than mere physical structure during their months together on contested mountain land. Martha arrived on a snowy afternoon, determination evident in her brisk knock, and the ancient leather portfolio clutched protectively against her coat, refusing even coffee until Shed placed the yellowed envelope on the kitchen table between them. "Found this when clearing Mother's estate papers," she explained, watching as Caleb carefully extracted fragile pages, recognizing Margaret's handwriting immediately from the date nearly 20 years earlier. "Dearest Martha," the letter began, "what I share must remain between us until necessity demands otherwise." Continuing with detailed account of research Margaret had conducted following Elizabeth's increasingly troubled visits, connecting Blackwood mining operations to contaminated water sources near 3 separate facilities, resulting in clusters of unusual illnesses never officially linked to the company through legal maneuvering and strategic settlements. Most disturbing were Margaret's suspicions that Elizabeth's declining health and subsequent drowning accident directly resulted from her discovery of internal documents implicating Vernon in deliberately concealing environmental testing. Results: the letter suggesting Elizabeth had contacted Margaret about unexplained symptoms similar to those affecting families near mining operations. She feared they were slowly poisoning her after finding the reports. Margaret had written, but couldn't leave because of threats regarding custody of her son, claiming Vernon would ensure she'd never see the boy again if she attempted divorce. This revelation crystallized the true foundation of decades-long estrangement between Blackwoods and the Walker family. Elizabeth caught between powerful forces while Margaret preserved evidence should justice eventually become possible, her protection extending beyond death through carefully hidden documentation. While Eli processed this difficult truth about his mother's fate, Caleb suggested they complete the final renovation project they'd been approaching cautiously for weeks, transforming Margaret's preserved bedroom from shrine to living space. Together they carefully removed dust covers from furniture, Caleb sharing stories about each piece as they determined what to preserve and what to respectfully replace, Eli listening with growing understanding about the woman whose blood connected them across generations. They relocated Margaret's cherished rocking chair to the living room, where it would remain in daily use rather than isolated behind closed doors, placed her favorite quilt across Eli's bed connecting past to present through practical continuity, and arranged family photographs including newly discovered images of Elizabeth on walls once kept frozen in time. The physical transformation paralleled emotional evolution as Caleb finally released grief that had prevented forward movement, allowing Margaret's memory to integrate into living present rather than remain sequestered in untouchable past. While Eli found secure foundation through connection to family heritage that transcended Blackwood attempts to sever these essential bonds. Martha returned later that evening, gasping appreciatively at the transformed space, now filled with perfect balance of original elements and new additions, reflecting Ella's emerging identity, her weathered hand squeezing Caleb's briefly in silent acknowledgement of healing impossible to articulate directly. When Shed departed, Caleb found Eli arranging his few possessions in formerly forbidden space, now rightfully his, the boy's reverent care for inherited furniture, demonstrating understanding that occupying this room represented acceptance of broader legacy, including responsibility for truths Margaret had preserved at great cost. "Do you think my mother would approve?" Eli asked softly, carefully positioning his father's photograph beside one of Margaret and Elizabeth as young women, creating visual testament to family connections Vernon had attempted to erase. Caleb studied the room, transformed from monument to grief into living heritage, where past informed present without imprisoning it, nodding slowly as he replied, "She protected this mountain and its people even after she left it, just as you've returned to continue what she began, completing circles that matter more than Blackwoods will ever understand." Professor Elena Martinez arrived unannounced on a clear February morning, her university credentials and environmental science background lending authority to her presence as she spread geological surveys across the kitchen table. Maps covered with technical notations and color-coded indicators revealing what lay beneath Walker Mountain property. "The rare earth deposits are significant," she confirmed, pointing to concentrated areas matching the survey markers Eli had discovered months earlier, commercially valuable for electronics manufacturing with increasing demand globally. Precisely what Blackwood Mining seeks for their new technology division. More critical were her findings regarding the mountain's hydrology, the intricate network of underground springs feeding watersheds serving 3 counties downstream, with computer models demonstrating catastrophic contamination risks should mining operations breach natural barriers protecting these water sources. Conventional extraction methods would introduce heavy metals and processing chemicals directly into groundwater systems, Elena explained, leaving detailed reports supporting these conclusions for Caleb to share with county officials, increasingly concerned about Blackwood development proposals submitted through seemingly unrelated corporate entities. Armed with this scientific evidence, Caleb and James Mitchell presented comprehensive case to the County Environmental Protection Board, describing how proposed mining activities would threaten drinking water for thousands while creating minimal local employment. The documented pattern of Blackwood operations abandoning communities once resources were depleted, particularly compelling when supported by Margaret's preserved research. Sheriff Davis helped arrange meetings with county commissioners traditionally influenced by Blackwood financial contributions, their growing skepticism evident as Elena's findings contradicted company claims about minimal environmental impact, particularly when independent water quality testing from similar Blackwood operations revealed contamination patterns identical to those Margaret had documented decades earlier. Community support transformed from personal solidarity to organized resistance, landowners surrounding Walker property, establishing conservation easements, preventing future mining regardless of ownership changes, local businesses displaying information about watershed protection importance, church groups organizing prayer vigils emphasizing spiritual stewardship of mountain resources that transcended economic arguments. The cabin stood as physical manifestation of this community commitment, its restoration now complete from foundation to roof peak, weathered logs reinforced with modern materials that preserved original character while ensuring structural integrity for generations to come. Windows gleaming with clear glass that welcomed mountain light rather than shutting it away. Grounds cleared of years of neglect, revealing natural beauty once obscured by abandonment and grief. Inside, every room now reflected purposeful habitation rather than mere existence. Caleb's woodworking tools organized in workshop spaces where he taught Eli traditional crafts with growing confidence. Kitchen shelves filled with preserved food community members continued providing in mountain tradition of shared abundance. Living areas arranged for conversation and connection rather than isolated survival. Most symbolic was the handcrafted sign Eli had created under Jacob Turner's guidance, now mounted beside the front door where visitors couldn't miss its simple declaration, Walker Home Est. 1887, renewed 2025. The dates spanning generations of mountain stewardship while acknowledging the renewal that had occurred within its walls, both physical structure and human spirits. Standing together on the porch overlooking their property, snow-covered and peaceful in winter stillness, Caleb and Eli witnessed tangible evidence of transformation that extended beyond legal battles still pending in county courts, beyond Blackwood threats increasingly undermined by scientific evidence and community resistance, beyond initial uncertainty that had marked their first tentative connection months earlier when a desperate boy had appeared seeking work and found family instead. Their shared journey of restoration creating foundation strong enough to weather whatever challenges Vernon Blackwood might still attempt, in his pursuit of resources they now understood were worth protecting for reasons transcending mere ownership or monetary value. The county commissioners' meeting erupted into chaos as Sheriff Davis presented surveillance recordings capturing Vernon Blackwood offering substantial bribes to two officials, his carefully constructed public image crumbling as the evidence played through courthouse speakers for all assembled citizens to witness. The Environmental Protection Order is permanent, Judge Williams announced after reviewing Elena's research alongside community impact statements. All mining permit applications regarding Walker Mountain and surrounding properties are hereby denied with prejudice. Protecting watershed resources declared essential public interest. Lawrence Blackwood maintained professional composure despite the devastating ruling, gathering documents with practiced efficiency while Vernon stormed from the courthouse, ignoring reporters' questions and community members' quiet satisfaction at justice long delayed finally manifesting through their collective efforts. 3 days passed in peaceful celebration before the confrontation arrived on their doorstep, Vernon appearing alone at dusk, his luxury vehicle parked haphazardly in the clearing, movements erratic as he pounded on the door Caleb and Eli had carefully restored months earlier. "You think you've won?" he shouted as Caleb positioned Eli protectively behind him, Vernon's normally controlled facade shattered by consecutive defeats, decades building what nobody can touch. "And mountain trash thinks they can stop me." The uncharacteristic public loss of control revealed the true man beneath expensive tailoring, his voice rising as he gestured wildly toward the surrounding property. "Do you have any idea what those minerals are worth? What companies worldwide would pay to access them?" His threat emerged with chilling clarity as he withdrew a handgun from his overcoat, desperation having pushed him beyond legal maneuvering into direct action. Accidents happen on mountains all the time. Cabin fires, unfortunate falls, problems solved permanently when people interfere with progress. The sudden appearance of Sheriff Davis and 2 deputies emerging from forest shadows interrupted Vernon's increasingly unhinged monologue, their presence unexpected but explained by Martha's intuition. that had prompted her call to authorities after observing Vernon's car heading toward the isolated property without Lawrence's usual moderating presence. "Threatening minors with deadly weapons earns serious charges, Mr. Blackwood," the sheriff stated calmly, deputies securing the firearm while placing Vernon in handcuffs. His protestations about influence and connections falling on unsympathetic ears as evidence of attempted intimidation was documented for courts previously impressed by his philanthropic community image. Standing on their porch as authorities departed with Vernon secured in the patrol vehicle, Caleb and Eli surveyed their completely restored home, gleaming in evening light. Its transformation from dilapidated grief monument to vibrant family dwelling, mirroring their personal journey over months of shared labor and growing trust. The hand-carved porch railings Eli had completed under Jacob's mentoring framed views of mountains that would remain protected for generations, fresh paint highlighting original architectural details preserved rather than replaced, new roof providing security against elements while maintaining traditional design that connected present to past through continuous rather than broken lineage. Inside, weighted spaces filled with warmth rather than emptiness, rooms designed for connection rather than isolation, a home rebuilt through determination that had proven stronger than wealth or power could overcome, standing as physical testament to healing that transcended mere renovation, creating sanctuary where belonging grew from shared purpose rather than documents or legal declarations, a legacy Margaret would have recognized as worthy continuation of Walker family commitment to values beyond price or purchase. Judge Williams' announcement came without fanfare, the simple statement, permanent guardianship granted to Caleb Walker, carrying weight beyond legal terminology, as Eli launched himself across the courtroom into waiting arms that had become home more surely than the cabin they had rebuilt together. Community members filled the courthouse, benches erupted in quiet applause, mountain restraint containing celebration until proper time and place, while Vernon Blackwood, free on substantial bail pending multiple charges, exited with Lawrence without comment, their defeat complete in ways money and influence could not reverse. The gathering that followed transformed the Walker property into celebration grounds, tables laden with potluck abundance spanning the cleared yard where once only neglect had grown, neighbors who had stood witness through months of challenges now sharing victory that belonged to collective mountain values rather than merely individual perseverance. Inside the fully restored home, Eli performed a ceremony, witnessed by all present but truly meant for himself and Caleb, carefully placing his father's photograph on the mantel alongside generations of Walker family images. Visual testament to families joined through choice and circumstance rather than merely blood connection. The deliberate arrangement communicating what legal documents merely formalized about belonging, transcending conventional definitions. Martha presented a hand-stitched quilt pieced by community women, each square containing fabric from participating families. Practical artwork that would provide both warmth and visible reminder of connections, extending beyond cabin walls into surrounding hollows and ridges, where mountain people had protected their own since settlement began. Tom Henderson announced completion of access road improvements ensuring year-round passage regardless of weather, while Jacob Turner presented Eli with master-crafted woodworking tools sized specifically for growing hands, acknowledging the boys' developing skills and place within traditional mountain craftsmanship lineage. As evening approached and celebration continued around fire pit where stories flowed alongside shared food and music, Caleb and Eli slipped away briefly to the newly rebuilt porch, its sturdy structure supporting matching rocking chairs where they surveyed mountains bathed in sunset colors, peaks and valleys that would remain unspoiled for generations through their combined efforts alongside community that understood true value, transcending mineral deposits or corporate valuation. What happens next? Eli asked quietly, the question containing none of the fear or uncertainty that would have accompanied similar words months earlier when Head first arrived desperate and alone on these same steps, now rebuilt through shared labor that had simultaneously reconstructed broken lives. Caleb considered this thoughtfully, noting how the boy's profile against mountain backdrop revealed Walker family features emerging alongside Hayes' characteristics. Inheritance more meaningful than anything Vernon Blackwood had attempted to purchase or control. "We keep building," he answered simply, gesturing toward workshop where projects waited for skilled hands, garden plots prepared for spring planting, and surrounding forest requiring generations of stewardship. Not just structures but connections, traditions worth preserving, skills worth passing along. The statement encompassed future stretching beyond immediate concerns into legacy that would outlast them both. Establishing foundation, Eli would eventually continue with children of his own, mountain heritage surviving through deliberate transmission rather than documented ownership. Their matching rocking chairs moved in synchronized rhythm as darkness gathered across landscape they had protected together, the cabin behind them glowing with warmth visible through windows once broken but now restored. Light spilling outward as metaphor for healing that had transformed not merely physical structure, but lives once shattered by loss, now rebuilt through determination, proving stronger than grief or greed. Creating home where family transcended mere relation to encompass all that truly mattered on this mountain, they would protect together for all the days ahead.